Okay, I want you to picture this. It's July 2nd, 1944. You're near Cherbourg, France. A German army nurse, a Dr. Schweister, she's climbing out of this dark underground hospital. She's squinting, the daylight is just blinding, and her hands are raised high in surrender to American forces. Behind her, 8 other nurses follow. Now, these women, they truly believed they were the absolute pinnacle of modern medicine. They were serving a cause that they were told was destined for a glorious victory. But their entire reality, everything they thought they knew, was about to be completely and utterly shattered. Just hours, literally hours before she was captured, that was her firm, unshakable belief. And look, this wasn't just some casual opinion. This was a worldview that had been hammered into her, forged by years of nonstop propaganda. A propaganda machine that painted America as this weak, decadent, crumbling society. So to her, the idea that the Americans had this abundance of supplies, it wasn't just unlikely. No, it had to be a psychological trick. It was a lie designed to break their will. They were totally convinced of their own strength and their enemy's weakness. But that deeply held belief, the very bedrock of her identity, it was about to slam head-on into a reality that was so overwhelming, so undeniable, that it would leave nothing standing. The unraveling was about to start, and believe me, it was going to be fast and it was going to be total. Before we go any further, just pause on that for a second. Seriously, what would it actually take? I'm not talking about changing your mind on some small issue, like your favorite pizza topping. What would it take for you to accept that the fundamental truths you've built your entire life around are completely, totally false? For these nurses, the answer wasn't going to be an argument or some pamphlet. Oh no. It was a series of profound shocks, one right after another, starting with the most basic tools of their trade. So the first crack in their worldview, it wasn't a debate, it wasn't an argument, it was something way more tangible. It was the sheer, unbelievable, almost offensive scale of American resources. They were about to step from a world of desperate scarcity, where every single scrap was precious, into a world that just seemed to have an infinite supply of everything. The difference between their reality and what they were about to witness, it was just staggering. These German nurses came from a world of just making do. They would reboil and reuse bandages until they literally fell apart. Surgery, that was done by candlelight in damp caves. Blood transfusions were these desperate, incredibly risky person-to-person affairs. But then they see the American field hospitals. Bandages were used once and then just casually thrown away. Powerful sulfur drugs were used like they were nothing. And they had these huge supplies of stored blood plasma, a technology that was basically a myth to the German army. This quote from Greta Falk, she was another one of the captured nurses, it just captures their shock perfectly. It wasn't just that the supplies were available. It was the casualness of it all. This level of waste was completely incomprehensible to them. They were seeing an industrial and medical power that their own government had sworn up and down did not exist. Every single discarded bandage was a direct, physical punch in the face to the propaganda they'd been swallowing for years. And then there was the miracle drug, penicillin. To the German medical corps, this stuff was like a rumor, a nearly unobtainable fantasy. In 1943, a year before these nurses were captured, the United States produced 21 times billion units of it. That number alone was just beyond their comprehension. It represented a power to heal infections and save lives on a scale they couldn't even begin to imagine. And then, by 1945, just 2 years later, that number didn't just grow, it exploded. 6.8 trillion units. You heard me right, trillion. This wasn't just medicine anymore, this was proof. It was undeniable proof of an industrial machine that just made a complete mockery of every Nazi claim. This was the first undeniable piece of evidence that they had been profoundly, deeply deceived. But the next shock, well, that would cut even deeper. So, if the sheer amount of stuff was a shock to their minds, what they saw next was a shock to their souls. It challenged the very core of their training, their ethics, everything they'd been taught. This wasn't about what the Americans had anymore, it was about how they chose to use it. To really get this, we have to understand their education. German nurses were trained under this principle, Erbe- und Rassenkunde, and the idea was brutally simple. Medicine's job wasn't to heal every single person, no, its purpose was to strengthen the German race. The weak, the infirm, the racially impure, they weren't patients to be saved, they were liabilities to be managed or, eliminated. For them, healing was always, always secondary to ideological purity. So they arrive as prisoners, right? As the enemy. They're fully expecting to be treated as subhuman, or worse. But instead, what they witness are American medics giving the exact same high-quality care, the same penicillin, the same plasma, the same surgical skill to a wounded German soldier as they would to an American GI. The simple act of universal compassion was a direct assault on their entire philosophy. It's what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, and this was it in its absolute purest form. It just didn't compute. And this kindness, it went way beyond the hospitals. In POW camps across America, they ran into a kind of compassion that was just baffling. I mean, they were the enemy, yet the American Red Cross was giving them packages with coffee and chocolate. At Christmas, local church choirs came to sing German carols to them. Boy Scouts brought them handmade cards. To a mind that's been trained in an ideology of absolute, total racial hatred, this kind of compassion just seemed illogical. It made no sense. But maybe the most profound worldview-shattering challenge was yet to come. Because of the U.S. military's own segregationist policies at the time, African-American nurses were often assigned to care for enemy prisoners. So you have these German nurses who were just steeped in this Nazi ideology of Aryan supremacy, and they find themselves being treated by and working under the supervision of Black professionals. They witnessed firsthand the undeniable skill, the deep knowledge, and the incredible compassion of these women, which just powerfully demolished the racist lies that were at the very heart of their belief system. So all of these experiences, the shocking abundance, the illogical compassion, the professionalism of people they'd been taught were inferior, they were all chipping away at the foundation of their beliefs. But the final, devastating blow was still on its way. This was the moment where denial was no longer an option. This was the moral reckoning. You know, there's a moment when a person's entire reality just breaks. A moment when the lies become so obvious that the only thing left is the cold, hard, inescapable truth. For these nurses, that moment had arrived. In the spring of 1945, the American authorities sat them down and showed them the footage from the newly liberated concentration camps. The nurses saw everything. They saw how their profession, the noble act of healing, had been systematically twisted by their own government into a tool for torture and for mass murder. This wasn't enemy propaganda. This was the logical, horrifying endpoint of the very ideology they had been serving. They realized their service hadn't been to strengthen the race. It had been to enable genocide. Now, a revelation that profound can absolutely destroy a person. But for these nurses, it became a catalyst, a spark for a total transformation. You see, the Americans didn't just shatter their old world. They gave them the tools to help build a new one. Their journey wasn't over, and in a lot of ways, it was really just beginning. The American authorities started this systematic process of re-education. And this wasn't just about denazification. It was about reprofessionalization. These nurses attended mandatory courses on things like medical ethics, patient rights, and the scientific method, ideas that had been completely erased from their original training. They were being transformed step by step from prisoners of war into the future leaders of a new democratic German medical system. And their impact when they went home was just immense. When they finally returned to a Germany where over 60% of the hospitals had been destroyed, they brought back more than just skills. They brought a new philosophy. These former prisoners established new nursing schools, schools built on principles of patient advocacy and scientific rigor. They introduced the American systems for blood banking and antibiotic use, and in doing so, they fundamentally reshaped German medicine from the ground up. Decades later, a group of the surviving nurses released a statement. And this quote, it just says it all. They understood the profound journey they had been on. They arrived as servants of an ideology, and they left as witnesses to a higher truth. Their final message wasn't just for their colleagues, it was for all of us. That medicine's one true purpose is to heal, and it must never, ever be corrupted by ideology. And that brings us right back to today, because their story is so much more than just history. It's a powerful lesson about the danger of ideological bubbles and the incredible courage it takes to confront uncomfortable truths. They were trapped in one of the most powerful propaganda machines ever created. But today, our bubbles are often of our own making, right? They're curated by algorithms and they're reinforced by our own choices. So the question their story really leaves us with is this. What is the undeniable evidence out there that we might be refusing to see, simply because it would shatter the world we think we know?